Hey, shalom, shalom. I'm going to start off this video by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, YAHAWAHSHI, BaHaShem, Rakah HaKodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elder bishops, a great millstone that rule well, that teach well while learning the truth, 100% according to the Bible. Also want to say shalom to the elect, the 144,000 men, prophet, servants scattered abroad the four corners of the earth. And shalom to you, Akwaf, which are you sisters that are sincere, your children, shalom. And in today's video, as you can see, is going to be just a quick World War III update video on things, that are basically taking place around the world, especially with World War III, because we see that this conflict, is constantly heating up, man. Day by day, we're getting closer and closer to this thing, occurring. But as you can see from the thumbnail, it says the U.S. warns Putin. Trump warns basically, Russia that they will lose this war with Ukraine, and I'm actually getting to this video so we can see what the guy's talking about, and I'm going to get a few precepts and Lord's willing to be edifying. But with that being said, fair use under 1976 Copyright Act, not getting paid for this video, fair use.
Breaking news coming out today, July 14th, 2025, as we are hearing that President Donald Trump has issued a major, bold war warning to Putin, and he has told him, listen, if you do not stop the war in Ukraine immediately, we are going to hit you with U.S. weapons that we are going to send over to NATO. You're going to be hit with 100% tariffs. You're going to pay a heavy price, and you are going to lose if you do not end this war, and now. Now, in addition to that, in the last 24 hours...
Right. So you heard what the guy just said, basically what, Trump said to Putin, man. Those some bold words to say, but we know that this war will happen. And I'm actually get this precept right here. This is St. Matthew chapter 24, verse 6. This is what the Lord YAHAWAHSHI, when he was speaking to his disciples, which later on became apostles, minus in Judas Iscariot, ultimately warning them of the signs that will be occurring in the earth, ultimately before he makes his second return. He said this, this is Matthew 24 and 6. It says, and ye shall hear of wars, right? You got wars that have gone on, the war with Ukraine and Russia. And you also have the war with Iran and Israel taking place and various other little conflicts, right? And it says rumors of wars. That's going into talks of wars. So here it is. You got America threatening Russia, basically saying that, they're going to put tariffs and sanctions on them. They're going to give weapons to Ukraine in order for them to strike Russia and things of that nature. But we know soon to come that Russia and America are going to go head up with one another, man. Right. And we already see that conflict stemming from what's going on in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. You got America bagging Israel and you got Russia bagging Iran, right along with China, North Korea, and all of their other different allies. But we see all of these things building up, man, because it's going according to prophecy. And the Lord is the one that's ultimately putting the spirit on these devils to ultimately, to prepare and, make the threats and things in which it is that they're making, right? It tells you that in Proverbs 21 and 1. The king's heart, meaning his mind, is in the hands of the Lord. As the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. So YAHAWAHSHI is controlling the minds of these leaders, man, making them say the things that they're saying, But this is Matthew 24 and 6. Again, I'm going to read it from the top. It says, ye shall hear wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, right? But the end is not yet. And we know the end won't be to that MOTBC hip is made mandatory, because we know ultimately America, Babylon the Great, will be destroyed, man, by ICBM nuclear missiles. And that's what's going to happen to this place very soon. And we see everything that's occurring with all of these nations warring against one another, making threats towards one another, provoking one another, taunting one another, etc., that this is going to lead up to them ultimately, getting physical with one another. And the Lord is going to put the spirit on them to do so, right? So I'm actually reading this precept. This is Revelation chapter 11, verse 14. And it says the second woe was past, right? Talking about World War II, it has already passed. And behold, the third woe, right? Coming quickly, man. And we know it's coming very quickly. And we see that through all of these various different, conflicts that are happening, man, and how intense they just keep getting, right along with you have America and Israel preparing to do another strike on Iran, man. So, I mean, everything is building up to World War III. It's already here. We're just at a small stage of it, but it's going to continue to escalate and escalate, especially with this thing that Trump is doing, talking about how he's basically threatening Russia, telling them that they're going to lose. I mean, all of these things are going to end up going nuclear, man. at the very end. And that's where we see all of these things leading up towards, right? So I'm actually get this precept, man, because this is going to go into the Ezekiel 38 war, and also the Lord bringing all of these nations down, to the valley of Jehoshaphat, man. That's what all of this stuff is building up towards. That's why you got the Russia-Ukraine conflict happening already. And also you got the Israel and Iran conflict constantly, turning up and getting more intense. Because all of this is leading up towards this biblical war, man. Right? What the Lord said that he's going to bring all of these nations down, and they're going to fight in the battle of Armageddon, man. Which in the Hebrew, that means Armageddon, which is, mountain of troops, man. Which the Lord is going to bring all of these nations' military down there to the so-called Middle East, where they're all going to fight it out with one another, man. So that's where everything is ultimately going towards. That's what it's headed, right? This is Ezekiel chapter 38. I'm going to start at verse 1. It says, and the word of the Lord, YAHAWAHSHI, came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, right? That's talking about Russia. The chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, thus saith the Lord power, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the land of Salakia, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Because we know the Russians are Edomites, man. And we know that the Lord is against Esau, Edom, man. So though he's going to use Russia to fulfill his will and to, bring forth judgment upon America, Babylon the Great, right along with America's allies and these various other countries, the Lord is still against all of these heathen nations. He's just going to use them, right? As I said about him controlling the minds of the leaders earlier in Proverbs 21:1, he's just going to use them to fulfill his will, man. But he's against these heathen nations at the end of the day, So this is verse 3. And it says, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws. And that's what the Lord is going to do. Because once this situation gets more intensified between Israel and Iran, and you already have America aiding Israel with bombs, saying that they're going to give them B-2 stealth bombers, which are capable of delivering nuclear missiles, gravity bombs and things of that nature. So you got America talking about giving all of these things to Israel. And that's right. On the other hand side, you got Russia talking about supplying Iran with nuclear weapons as well, right along with North Korea, China, and all of these other allies of Russia. So that's what everything is building up to, man, And it says, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws and will bring thee forth, right? Because the Lord is going to bring Russia down to the Middle East, man. Right? That's why all of these nations are going to get led towards, right? And all thine army, right? Horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, right? Persia, which is modern day Iran, Ethiopia, right? And Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, right? It says Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands and many people with thee. So basically, you're going to have Russia with a lot of people that are going to be with them, man. Everybody's going to turn their back against America in that land of Israel where those little hats are, man. Everybody's going to be joined in with Russia, man. Even America's allies, man. Everybody's going to turn their back on this place. And you already see the beginning stages of that happening already, man. You had just a woman come out from the EU and basically said how they're going to counter-strike all of the tariffs that America are putting on them, man. So we're seeing the beginning stages of all of these nations hating America, man, in that land of Israel and turning their backs on these places, man. Right? Because these countries are going to be left to fend for themselves, man. Nobody's going to come to the help and the aid of America and Israel, man. These countries are going to be to their self, man. Right? And it says, well, I'm going to stop right there, but that's pretty much everything I was going to say on that, right? That you're going to have all of these nations that are going to gather up and the Lord is going to bring them down to the so-called Middle East today, right? And that's where they're going to all fight at, in the valley of Jehoshaphat, man. And I'm actually go to a precept just touching on that because that's the will of YAHAWAHSHI, man. This is Joel chapter 3, verse 2. It said, I will also gather all nations, right? Talking about these heathen nations, and all of these nations are the ones that you see getting prepared to fight. You got China, which are the Moabites. They're preparing for war. You got Esau, the so-called white man. He's preparing for war. You got all of these African nations. They're preparing for war. You got the Ishmaelites, the Elamites. All of these different people, the Ammonites, the so-called Japanese, all of these heathen nations are preparing to fight, man. And that's the spirit of YAHAWAHSHI, man. Because the Lord is putting that spirit on them because he's ultimately preparing their minds for this war that's about to come, man, when he's going to bring all of them down to the valley, man. So that's where he got the spirit on them now to be making these threats towards one another, to be talking about war consistently, to be talking about, oh, I'm a nuke you and we're going to nuke you and we got this amount of nuclear weapons. You just hear all of this back and forth going between these countries, man. And that's the spirit of the Lord, man. Right, so I'm going to finish reading it. It said, I will also gather all nations and bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, which in the Hebrew means YAHAWAHSHI, where the Lord is ultimately going to judge these heathen nations, man, for what they have done unto his people, man. Right, it tells you about that in Psalms chapter 83, man. And I'm going to get to that precept just to go along with what I'm reading in Joel, because this is going to be the reason why the Lord is going to bring these nations down there to the Middle East to judge them in World War III, man, due to what they have done unto the Lord's people, man. Right? You so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native American Indians, man. Right? This is Psalms chapter 83. And I'm starting at verse 3. It said, they have taken crafty counsel against thy people, right? Talking about you Israelites. And consulted against thy hidden ones, right? Verse 4, they have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation. And that's what all of these heathens have done, through their EU, through their NATO, through their, what is called what's that thing called that they go to every, I believe every few months or so, they have meetings. Oh, yeah, the United Nations, the water of the YAHAWAHSHI. They take counsel against the Lord's people at all of these events, man. You notice at all of these big meetings where you see all of these countries coming together and making, plans for the future of the world and things of that nature. You never see Jake, never see a so-called Negro, Latino, Native American, Indian man at none of these events, man, at none of those tables with these devils talking, because they're against you, Jake, right? And it says, they have said, come and let us cut them off for being a nation, that the name of Yasha Allah, right, may be no more in remembrance, right? Verse 5, for they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee, right? And these are the list of the nations, right? It said the tabernacle Edom, so-called white man, the Ishmaelites, so-called Arabs, Moab, so-called Chinese man, Hagarenes, so-called Hamites, right? Or, Salakia, the Hagarenes, which are the Hamites, which are the so-called Africans, It said Gabal and Ammon, right? So-called Japanese, Amalek, the so-called little hats over there in Atlanta, Israel, right? The same people that are about to get bombed to oblivion, right? These are the nations, man, that are confederate against us, man. The ones that are responsible for the oppression of the Lord's people, man. And he's going to use World War III. And I'm going to get back to the book of Joel chapter 3, verse 2. But he's going to use this war as a catalyst to destroy these nations, man, to judge them, to bring forth his fury upon them for what they have done unto his people, man. Right? So I'm going to read it again. I will also gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of YAHAWAHSHI and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage, Yasharallah, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land, right? So the reason why the Lord is going to bring forth this judgment upon these heathens is because of what they've done to his people, man. Right? So this is the Lord basically getting payback upon these devils, man. And he's going to use World War III to do it. Because we know also that our Lord YAHAWAHSHI, who the world English calls Jesus, he's going to show up in the midst of World War III, man. Right? And I'm actually go to a precept just touching on that. Right? This is 2nd Esdras chapter 13, because this is what's going to happen during the midst of World War III, while all of these nations are in the valley of Jehoshaphat ultimately fighting. Right? The Lord is going to show up and they're going to turn away their differences from each other and try to fight against the Lord, man. And the Lord is going to judge them, man. Right? But that's what everything is being set up for. This is what we see ultimately manifested. That's why you got all of these different conflicts being talked about and being stirred up around the world, because this is what's going to happen. This are the prophecies. These are the things that are going to take place in the very near future, man. Right? So this 2nd Esdras chapter 13, I'm starting verse 1. And it came to pass after 7 days, I dreamed a dream by night, right? This is the prophet Esdras. He's seen a vision, of the Lord returning and taking down these heathen nations, man. And it says, and lo, there arose a wind from the sea that it moved all the waves thereof, right? That's going to be the Lord returning in that fathership, right? Along with the innumerable multitude of angels, man, that are going to be in the chariots that the world English call UFOs, man. Right? This is what's going to happen during the midst of World War III of all of these nations fighting, man. The Lord is going to return in the midst of it, man. Right? And Yahweh Ratazah, we be delivered from that when it comes, And it says, and I beheld, and lo, that man waxed strong with the thousands of heaven, right? Which are the chariots, the angels. And when he turned his countenance to look, all the things trembled that were seen under him, right? That's going to be these nations, man. They're going to be over there fighting in the so-called Middle East. The Lord is going to crack this clouds and come down here from out of the fourth dimension, right? Coming into this physical realm. And all of these nations are going to see him, man, right? And they're going to be trembling. They're going to be full of fear. They're going to be scared, man. They're not going to know what to do, right? And this is verse 4. And whensoever the voice went out of his mouth, all they burned that heard his voice, like as the earth felleth when it filleth the fire. And that's going to be due to those chariots, man, right? That are going to be shooting out that fiery smoke out of them, man. Going to be shooting those laser beams, right? That's what the Lord is going to bring upon these heathens, man. And right along upon these 2/3 and everybody else here in America that ultimately faces that nuclear destruction. They're going to feel the wrath of the Lord through those chariots, man, right? So I'm going to go down. This is verse 5. And after this I beheld, and lo, there were gathered together a multitude of men out of number from the four winds of the heaven to subdue the man that came out of the sea, right? Because that's going to be all of these heathen nations. They're going to ultimately think that they can fight against Lord YAHAWAHSHI and prevail. That's what they're going to believe in their minds, right? And it says, but I beheld, and lo, he had graved himself a great mountain, which is that fathership, right? The biggest chariot. You know, the prophet Esdras said, I believe is on down, where he said that he couldn't even see the beginning or the ending of it. You know, roughly paraphrasing on how long it was. You know, it was very huge. He said it was like a mountain, you know. And he said, but I beheld, and lo, he had graved himself a great mountain and flew up upon it, right? And it says, but I would have seen the region or place whereout the hill was graven, and I could not, right? Talking about how large the chariot was, the fathership, right? He couldn't even measure it. You know, it was that big. That's why it tells you this scripture right here, right? When the Lord makes his return, everybody's going to see him, man. Because that chariot, you're not going to be able to miss it, man. When the Lord returns, man, everybody's going to see it. And like I said, he's going to return in the midst of World War III. And we see World War III constantly heating up and getting more intense. So we know that we're getting close. You know, like I said, the only thing we're waiting on now really is the MOTBC hit. But all of the prophecies are basically in place, man. Right? This is Revelations 1-7. It said, behold, he cometh with clouds, right? Talking about Lord YAHAWAHSHI coming with the chariots, man. And every eye shall see him, right? Talking about you 2/3, you scoffers, you heathens, all of you people, man. Y'all gonna see the Lord when he comes, man. Right? And it said, and they also which pierced him, going into reincarnation, right? And all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him, even so mine, right? So that's ultimately what's going to happen when the Lord returns, man. Everybody's going to see him, right? When he comes in that fathership, man, you know, during the midst of World War III, right? So I'm going to finish reading this second Esdras chapter 13, and I'm going to start at verse 8. It said, and after this I beheld, and lo, all they which were gathered together to subdue him were sore afraid, and yet durst fight, right? Because the Lord is ultimately going to put the spirit on Esau and on these other heathens to fight against him, man. Right? And they're going to lose miserably, man. But he's still going to put the spirit on them to try to fight, you know, try to use their AI, try to use all of their nukes, whatever it is that they ultimately have that they think they're going to come up against the Lord with and win. And it's going to fail, man, you know. So I'm actually finished reading verse 9. And lo, as he saw the violence of the multitude that came, right, the Lord going to be looking at these heathens, like ultimately how they're going to be plotting and looking at him and thinking they're going to war against him. And ultimately how he's going to destroy him, because the Lord is going to destroy these people, man. It tells you about that in the book of Revelations, how Michael and his angels, right? Let me get that. Bear with me, Salaki. Bear with me. This is Revelation chapter 12. And I'm going to start at verse 7 in the KJV. And it said, and there was war in heaven, right? Which is going to be talking about here on the earth, man, right? In the firmament, right? The heavens, the skies. And it says, Michael and his angels, right? Talking about the chariots, right? The angels of the Lord, right? Fought against the dragon, which is Esau, Edom. And the dragon fought and his angels, which are going to be these heathen nations and their military, man, right? When they ultimately try to fight up against the Lord, when he makes his return during them fighting in the midst of World War III. Right? And it said, and prevailed not, neither was their place found anymore in heaven. Right? Because the Lord is going to destroy these people, man. You know, that's what he's going to do. And he's going to use World War III to do it. You know? So this is back in 2nd Esdras chapter 13. And I'm going to start at verse Bear with me. I'm going to start at verse 9. It said, and lo, as he saw the violence of the multitude that came, he neither lifted up his hand, nor held sword, nor any instrument of war. Verse 10. But only I saw that he sent out of his mouth, as it had been a blast of fire, right? Which are going to be the laser beams coming from those chariots, man. And out of his lips a flaming breath, and out of his tongue he cast out sparks and tempests, right? And that's what YAHAWAHSHI is going to do, man. Right? This is what he's going to do in the midst of World War III when he returns and ultimately takes down these nations, man. Right? That have oppressed and afflicted his people, man. You know? And it says, 2nd Esdras 13 and 11, and they were all mixed together, the blast of fire, the flaming breath, and the great tempest, and fell with violence upon the multitude which was prepared to fight, right? And burned them up, every one, right? So that upon a sudden of an innumerable multitude, nothing was to be perceived, but only dust and a smell of smoke. When I saw this, I was afraid, man. You know, it scared Esdras, man. You know, because the Lord, when he returns during the midst of World War III, which we see this World War III is escalating, so we know we're getting closer and closer to the return of the Lord. You know, and it's going to be a terrible sight, man. You know, especially for those that are not on the side of YAHAWAHSHI, those that are not of the Lord's elect, man. You know, it's going to be bad for these people, man. You know, this is Isaiah chapter 66, verse 15. It said, for behold, the Lord, YAHAWAHSHI, will come with fire and with his chariots like a whirlwind to render his anger with fury and his rebuke with flames of fire, man, which are going to be those laser beams coming out of the chariots, right? Or what Esau calls so-called UFOs or UAPs, man, right? But those are the chariots of Israel. It tells you about that in 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 12, man. That's where Elijah was beamed up in, and that's also what our Lord YAHAWAHSHI was beamed up in. It tells you that in the book of Acts chapter 1, verse 9 through 11, man. And the angels said that the same way that you saw the Lord leave, that's how he's going to return, man. You know, roughly paraphrasing it. But this is verse 16. It says, for by fire and by his sword will the Lord plead with all flesh, and the slain of the Lord shall be many, man. Right? The Lord is going to do a lot of deleting, man. And he's going to do this during the midst of World War III. He's going to destroy these people over here in America, right? The chariots are going to blast over here, right along with the missiles, the ICBMs. And the Lord is going to destroy all of those heathens over there in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, man. Right? So it's just going to be a lot of, you know, judgment being brought forth, man. And that's what we're in the time and season of, judgment, man. So that's why you're going to continue to hear these wars and rumors of wars and things of that nature, because that's ultimately what everything is leading up towards, man. You know, this big battle that's going to take place in the very near future, man. And the return and the ushering in of our Lord, YAHAWAHSHI, man. Right? As I said before, who's going to return in the midst of World War III. Right? So, yeah, that's pretty much everything I had to say with today's video. I pray it be edifying. Salakia for being all over the place, but, you know, it was just the spirit. But to the next time, I'm going to say shalom to the elect.